Welcome to the Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm your host Maz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, my guest today is Dejan Mujkanovic. He is an Australian Army officer with 19 years of military experience. He has completed several tours of Afghanistan and also deployed to East Timor. Dejan is the only other Australian Army officer of Bosnian heritage I know, which is why this conversation is particularly close to my heart. He was born in northern Bosnia in 1980 and experienced the full brunt of the war in the 90s. His hometown of Prijedor made global news due to the campaign of ethnic cleansing committed by the Bosnian Serb forces seeking to forcefully remove the Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croat population from the area. As a result of these crimes, many of Dejan's extended family members were lost in concentration camps, and sadly, this includes his father, Senad Mujkanovic, who was killed in the Omarska concentration camp in 1992. In the ensuing chaos, Dejan was separated from his mother and his siblings, and they have lived apart ever since. During his journey, he was forced to spend over 2 years in various refugee camps in Croatia and Austria, and in the late 1995, he was fortunate to settle in Australia with his grandmother. Now, 25 years later, Dejan is married and a proud father to his son. Dejan, thanks for joining me.
Firstly, I would like to applaud you for your initiative in starting this podcast. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my story and more importantly, giving opportunity to others to share theirs. Secondly, I would like to remind our listeners that what I share in this podcast are my views and do not represent official ADF position. And look, lastly, and most importantly, I want to acknowledge that my stories can never do justice for all those who went through similar events, but who suffered beyond that experienced by me. Those who were part of my story through all wars we will talk about were source of my strength, and I'm eternally indebted to those many who are far better human beings than I ever was or ever will be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, for saying that. And I should also say that Dejan is also known as Boz, which is the nickname he has picked up due to his Bosnian heritage. So perhaps throughout this podcast, I might even refer to him as either Boz or Dejan, but I think Boz kind of rolls off the tongue. And the other thing I want to mention as well, maybe as a source of as a short disclaimer to our listeners, I met Boz back in 2007, I think. You were 6 months ahead of me at the Royal Military College, Duntroon. I was coming across from the Australian Defence Force Academy into the college, and we were asked to choose which building or which company we wanted to go to. And for those who are not aware of our listeners, there are 5 companies on the college, and you go to one of those, and that kind of that's where you do your training. I had absolutely no idea. I had no affiliation with any companies. Some people had family members who had gone there before. The only thing that was told to me by one of my supervisors was, hey, there's another crazy Bosnian, shaved head and smokes like a chimney, and he's in Kapyong. I was like, yep, sounds about right. So why don't I also go to Kapyong? So that's how I met Boz. So it was that was interesting. But Boz, before we dive into the details of your background too deeply, perhaps we can start more recently. With your decision to join the Australian Army. What motivated you to first become a soldier and then later an officer in the Army?
I suppose, firstly, when I first moved to Australia, like many young refugees, we find ourselves not necessarily on a good path. Okay, and all the elders in the Bosnian community, my family members specifically, very supportive of service in military, because, as you remember, our fathers, they all served as conscripts. Yeah. So they believe that a young man's life should include some military service. I thought that a young man's life should include military service as well. And so walking through Parramatta, not having flunked out of uni again at the age of 21, and I was like, where do I go from here? And I get some courage, walked into a recruitment office and never looked back. And look at everything that I have done since has been with help of Army. So to that end, army is my family. Army was the family I was looking for, and I'll be always indebted to the Australian Defence Forces, specifically Army, for giving a refugee a chance to structure his life back after the events of Bosnia and refugee camps and whatnot. So, and then the other side of that is having experienced bad soldiering and good soldiering, having observed bad soldiering and good soldiering during Bosnian War. I wanted to make a change, so I wanted to be the good soldier, and I aspired to be a good soldier, and here we are, 19 years later.
Yeah. You made an interesting comment right at the start of that many refugees end up going down the not so good path. What do you mean by that?
I think it's difficult. A lot of refugee kids, be it in Australia or what I've observed in Austria and in Croatia, they're like lost boys and girls. There's a lot of kids who are orphans. A lot of kids come out traumatized, scared, and on top of that, they're dealing with the normal stuff the kids are dealing with, being a teenager. So when you imagine the turbulence of becoming a teenager, and you combine that you're in effect becoming a teenager as you're going through refugee camps, that it's inevitable that your outlook on life is pursuing more immediate happiness and pleasure than long-term success. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, and that I can. The reason that struck a chord is because I can certainly relate to that myself. There were specific moments in my life that, as you say, you kind of, you either go left or right, and that particular track that you take is where you end up. And there were certainly a couple of points where I could have very easily gone down that path, or the not so good path. But maybe we can track back to that as the story unfolds. But as I said in my intro, so you were born in northern Bosnia. So you were born in Prijedor?
Yes. Well, actually, on birth certificate, I'm actually born in Banja Luka.
Okay.
That was because of birth complications or whatever. But I was born in Banja Luka. But born only. I grew up in Prijedor.
Yeah. And the war started in 92, so you would have been 11, 12? You were born in 1980, so you would.
So I was 12 years old when the war started in that part of Bosnia. Obviously, I remember the lead up to war and issues in Croatia, which I believe started sort of second half of 91. But yes, I was 12 years old when it started. Yeah.
Now I have a distinct memory of the day the war started in Sarajevo. I mean, we were, and what I remember of it. I mean, I'm a year younger than you, so I was 11. My mum, the night before, I guess the war started, my mum could hear the river that flows a couple of kilometers from our house. And that was the first time she could ever hear the river. It was that quiet. It was eerily quiet. And so quiet that my parents both realized something is going on. So the next morning, we just kind of grabbed a bag each and went to my aunt's house further inside Sarajevo, inside the city. That day, basically, the barricades went up. The city was closed. The next day, the guns started firing. What do you remember of those first days? How did the war start for you?
And this is where our Bosnian war experiences may differ a little bit. So for us, the bulk of war was more about ethnic cleansing. There was certainly shooting, but how it began, it was 1992, and the Serb separate forces occupied the city. They did basically like a coup over key city installations. And all I remember is waking up in the morning and, mom and dad were talking feverishly about something. And I said, hey, should I go to school? And mom said, yes, you will go to school. I remember seeing, because we lived right next to the tallest building in Prijedor, and there was a different flag on there. I remember I went to school, and there was, there was normally in class, there was about 30 of us. That day, there was about 12 of us. And I remember talking to one of the girls, and all the kids at all, and said, "Oh, what's happening?" And she said, "Oh, the city is liberated." And I said, "Liberated from whom?" Like I was convinced that we grew up in this. I was convinced it must have been the Germans or something.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Liberated? And she said, from Muslims. And it was the first time that and then I heard my family talk before that we were Muslim background, but my dad was strictly not religious. So I went back home and told mom I could experience there was sort of a fear in the city, like you could, there was less movement and everybody sort of weirdly looking at each other. And I went back home and I said to mom, "Hey mom, are we Muslims?" And mom was angry at me. She's like, "Stop talking like that." And I'm like, okay. I was so confused. So my experience of war was utter confusion. It was uncovering an identity that I wasn't quite aware of. Understand? Because a lot of us weren't necessarily, attuned to our ethnicity before. So it was that's how it started. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a hugely important point, right? I mean, we woke up to an identity. And I think that was, my experience was similar in that sense. I mean, we are a secular family, never had, generations that I know, the 2-3 generations back, certainly, we haven't had any religious affiliations. But overnight, my mum became Croat, which is bizarre because she's anything but, and my dad became Muslim, right? Which is anything but, right?
There you go.
It's an identity that was ascribed to you against your better judgment, right? But it was the identity that meant life or death, right? How did that unfold in Prijedor for you guys? Because obviously, you were now marked ultimately as Muslim, even though you, as you say yourself, didn't know up until that point.
Yeah, no, look, so my dad was a police officer, and a couple of days into the change of government, my grandfather came, and we all packed in his car, and we were going to drive out to a village called Kozarac, which is between Prijedor and Banja Luka, and sort of, early on the way to Omarska as well. But we went to Kozarac, and we went into hiding there. I went, to live with my grandfather, and Kozarac is a little village, small township that got destroyed in the end for it. But it was majority Bosnian Muslims. It was my mom's side of families from there. So when we spent there approximately 6 weeks, and in the ensuing period, the Yugoslav National Army, we were still tracking. There was a Yugoslav National Army. Drove through the little township and occupied artillery positions and held some high ground on famous Kozara Mountain. And we were there for about 6 weeks, and then Dad came and said, "Hey, look, we actually have to head back for one reason or another." But when we went back, he told me that I will go into hiding at my other grandmother's place in the city, which was the grandmother that I finished up living with.
Back in Prijedor, yeah? So you were going to come back from...
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
That is correct. So as we came back from 6 weeks worth of hiding, they dropped me off to my grandmother's, and I stayed there with my grandmother and grandfather. He went with my mom and my sisters back to the apartment. And that was the last time that I saw him. Was as he dropped me off, he came over to check up on me, and shortly after that, he was taken and killed. But it unfolded like that. So the terror, the horror, slowly built up, and we found ourselves in very very difficult situation by mid-93.
Yeah, which obviously we'll get to. But why were you separated at that point? Why did they drop you off to your grandmother's?
My parents were afraid, I suppose, because of my age.
Yeah.
I was going on 13. I was becoming a teenage Bosnian boy, and unfortunately, they feared for my safety. They feared that I would draw a lot of attention as a male, as a young male, as much as my father did, and I suppose they didn't want to run that risk. They were happy for me to stay at my grandmother. It was also an area which I'd grown up in. The neighbors knew me, and they just felt it was a little bit safer there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And you said that was the last time you saw your dad when he dropped you off. I mean, you told me that he was lost later in the Omarska camp. But what do you know of the circumstances of how?
And this is something that I sort of pieced together over years. So he went to the markets to buy some milk for my youngest sister at that stage. She was that stage. She was 2 or 3 months old,
wow,
and he took my other sister, who was at that stage 5 years old. He went to the markets to buy milk, and the security police picked him up at the markets, just threw him in the car, and left my sister just crying in the middle of the city in market. And some people returned her back home to mom. He finished up being taken to an interrogation camp called Karaterm. Karaterm. A lot of people got killed in Karaterm, or they were definitely tortured there.
Yeah.
There was systematic targeting of ex-police and people of importance of Muslim background and Catholic background, so Bosnian Croats in the city, and he was swept up in that wave. From Karaterm, after a few days, they took him to Omarska. Whilst he was at Karaterm, a friend of his who was an Orthodox was Serbian soldier at that stage, came over to my grandfather and told my grandfather, and I was there when he came, that dad was taken. He said that dad was cold and he needs a jacket. So my grandfather went and grabbed his warm winter jacket and gave that jacket and a bottle of cognac to be taken to my father. And it was that bottle of cognac ultimately that finished up being that played a huge impact on his life, as from the people who were in Omarska with my dad. From what I gather is that as dad was sitting there, all these men were sitting on this huge mining hangar, next to each other, and dad took out the bottle of cognac and shared it around. And a Serbian soldier came in, saw the bottle of cognac, and demanded that the people in captivity tell him who brought the cognac in. My dad put his hand up. My dad was told to get up. He walked out and nobody ever saw him again. It was in 2006 that it was, I suppose, around 2005 we started finding some bones from that. And then in 2006, we had some over 75% worth of bones. And I talked to my family, and we agreed that we will conduct the funeral so we can all see some closure. The issue was that as these men were killed in Omarska, they were buried immediately in the mine pits there. Then as the world found out about the horrors that were committed by that state, they started covering their tracks, and they moved bones to different pits. So you finish up having a lot of families, the bones scattered around the city. And when we buried dad in 2006, he was buried with, I believe it was over 300 people. It was a mass funeral for over 300 people. And I went there, and I was at that stage. You remember, I think it was just as you were coming in, coming into RMC. I went there for a couple of weeks, came back and continued my training. And that's how Dad. That's how Dad died. Yeah.
I mean, if they feel like such empty words to say, I'm sorry to hear that, because they are the pain and torture that your family has gone through is it's very hard to capture in words. But I congratulate you on having the courage to then join the military and retain a sense of normalcy. And I think the rest of your family, you've also lost other members of your family, right? In the same camps, is that right?
Yes, that is in camps. Yes. So when Dad disappeared, my uncle, who lived not too far from us, so my mom's brother and his family came in and they stayed with us for a little bit. Then my uncle was taken eventually as well, but he finished up going to a different camp called Ternopolje.
Yeah.
And Ternopolje was the people were still mistreated and whatnot, but it wasn't on the level of Keretam or Omarska, definitely. So what was happening, the men were taken to Ternopolje, and then from there they were either taken into the worst places or released in some case, so they can travel through Croatia as refugees and get out.
Yeah, or exchanged or whatever for.
Yeah, that's right. So I was in Ternopolje actually, because my auntie through my uncle's friend was a guard at the camp, and he allowed us to bring some food to some men. So I went inside the camp. Went to a little. Told me to go to a little hole in the fence. I went inside the hole of the fence, found all these men. I brought them some bread, some food, and I saw 3 or 4, these 20 guys never made it out alive. Interestingly, I have a memory of, as I brought all this food to these guys, that they sat down and they made me eat first, and then they ate. It was epic. But yes, it was a lot of family members. So
hold on. Just to pick on that, because without skimming over that point. I mean, so you were what? You were 12 at the time, and you snuck in through a hole in the fence line to bring in food to some to about 20 men who were basically prisoners of war.
That is correct.
And a lot of which didn't make it out alive afterwards. What was that like for you at that time, as a 12-year-old? I mean, what goes through your mind at that stage?
I suppose if there was something positive, was probably my age. I think I was just too young to understand the gravity of what was happening around me.
Yeah.
Everything seemed like an adventure. Military equipment driving around, tanks. All of us were just excited to see tanks.
Yeah.
Whereas the older people, as the adults were concerned, we thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was amazing, but child's curiosity.
Yeah.
As far as the hole in the fence line, there was, of course, the guard was a friend of mine. Was a friend of my uncle, so it wasn't. I didn't do
you weren't sneaking in.
I wasn't sneaking in. He just told me, "Hey, go to the hole in the fence line there."
Yeah.
And went in there, found them, and we gave him some food, and that was it. You know what I mean? I'm not claiming at all to have done some, but it was like that. I was a child. I just it was later. It's in years later that you go like, wow, well that wasn't normal. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's a bizarre experience, and that's something I want to touch on. But it's something I reflect on as well. I mean, because you made a point now about it being kind of, as a kid you're excited, and I was in Sarajevo, so the city was under siege, so we couldn't move around. We were sitting in the cellar because it was being bombed all day every day, and I was sitting in the cellar drawing tanks and planes with the Bosnian flag on it, and that's it. We were going to war, and like you said, it was exciting. We had like a little target at that point in time. It was off Milosevic that we threw, kind of darts or that sort of stuff. Little rocks that me and my brother used to compete with. Who's going to get more points? And because we left in a UN convoy, and when the time came for us to leave, I remember crying that whole night. Not because I was, going to leave my dad, which of course was part of it, because he couldn't leave because of fighting age male, but because I was being torn away from, the war. That's it. I'm going to fight. What do you mean I'm not going to be here? Like you say, it was, there's army, there's tanks, there's weapons. I need to defend my country, which is a really, really bizarre experience to have. And only later do you reflect on how unnatural that experience is. When did you first reflect on that experience and realize that, hold on, this is actually not something that most kids go through?
So as we came out of, so it was in mid-93, my uncle that I mentioned before and his family were leaving Bosnia, and my mom put me on a Red Cross bus with them. And I was never going to live with my mom again after that, or my sisters. And we left through to Croatia. And in Croatia, my grandmother found me because my uncle had to continue going on because he had papers to move on to US with his family. I couldn't come along. So my grandmother found me, the one from my father's side. And she took me with her to refugee camp in Varaždin. It was really in Varaždin that once we freed ourselves from the propaganda and information warfare that was going on at that stage, where we were in Prijedor, we could see that Bosnian Muslims are thinning out. We could see that people are disappearing. We know that our father was gone, but there was a hope at all stages. All these men, all these young men, all these women. Were actually outside just waiting for us. We thought they made it out. And it was in Varaždin really that we started being confronted by possibility that something really bad is happening there, that something is not going fine. You have to remember it was really some hard work, some hard and brave work by Western media that uncovered the existence of camps. And it was same for us who lived there. We just, it wasn't necessary. When I look back, the signs were there, but I was young, and people were optimistic, and people just did not expect that something like that was going on. And that is a fact. They didn't expect it. So it was really in Varaždin. Then going to refugee camps in Austria, I started encountering more orphans. Stories started surfacing. Distinct possibility, rumors started that a lot of men in Omarska were killed. That it wasn't just that the second group of relatives and whatnot, they were killed in Manjača, which was and I'm sure you heard of Manjača concentration camp. You heard it. Omarska was a death camp. Manjača was a death camp. The people that we weren't seeing in the city, there's more chance that they were killed than they were alive. But that is something that was pieced together. It was something that was uncovered by media. It was something that, that we found out talking to other people. But we knew things were bad, but we just didn't understand how far some people went in harming their fellow citizens during that war.
So how many members of your family perished in the war?
Look, on my dad's side was my dad. My mom's side, it was a brother. Then because we, as you know, with us, your first and second cousins, little uncles. In Kozarac, I can think of at least 3-4 men were related, so they were related to me, to my grandfather. They're all the youngest one, I believe he was 17, and I have to make a mention of, so my grandfather's brother had but one son, and that son was killed. And what I found out when I went back to Bosnia was that actually that son he was adopted, and from what people understood of that child when he was adopted is that he was actually a Serbian child brought up by a Muslim man. He was given a name Emir, and Emir was killed because of who his dad was. But understanding was that he was actually Serb who was adopted. But so a lot of men. That I had.
More insanity.
You can if you if you go to Kozarac and the lines and lines of gravestones around, always date 1992.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely insane. Why? What happens? How is this? How do you understand it? How is this possible? What makes a neighbor kill a neighbor? How does this transition happen? And how does it happen so quickly and then so viciously?
I can only speculate. Right? So speaking to my sister, my sister is currently, she's a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania, and her area of research is conflict studies.
Unsurprisingly, of course, yeah.
And we were talking about this. We were specifically talking about the notion of collective, right? So, I looked at, I thought about this a little bit, and I have a theory that has much to do is that people ultimately do this to belong, to amplify, their belonging to a particular side. We had some great presenters. I did this. We covered this off at Staff College. It was under leadership, but the theory is that a social identity theory is self-categorization theory, where us as individuals we try to become members of this bigger collective. And I think ultimately that's what drives people. They do it because they think, hey, my collective demands me to do this, and hence people do it to belong. And an interesting thing about that same collective is that as that collective is winning, people can have a common experience of joy, happiness, pride. You can see it in different types of groups. But what collective is unable to do is accept responsibility and experience guilt collectively. So ultimately, I think people do it as a buy-in into the collective, into the group, to amplify their membership of that group. And as the horrors start in the beginning, it might be slapping a man, and then hitting a man or a woman, and that just deteriorates because there is no mediating factor. Law doesn't play role anymore. All you have to do is you have to do worse and worse things in order to show your allegiance.
To justify.
It's a theory because I refuse to think that people are inherently evil, because they're not. They're not. People are not evil. Mobs are. And as we become part of these mobs, we leave some of our ethical and moral compass aside, and we go forth and do what mob wants us to do, so we can be part of this mob. And when it's one done, and when the mob is found to have committed something horrible, we distance ourselves from it, and we people find it difficult. So on the day that we buried 304 people in the city of Prijedor, that wasn't even announced on Prijedor radio station, because people there just cannot comprehend that this was done around them. And it was the same day as it was for experiences during Second World War with concentration camps. So people just are refusing to accept that something was done in the name. They're refusing to accept that it was right under their noses and they could have seen if they wanted to. Because ultimately human beings are incapable of taking on that much pain and that much responsibility and guilt. At least I theorize.
And I think you'll find there's plenty of literature supporting that as well. And particularly with social identity theory. I mean, one of the things that it does espouse is that galvanizing these groups, this us and them, or me and the other. It's very easy once these boundaries have been drawn. We exaggerate the similarities between our perceived inner group, and we also exaggerate the differences between the imposed other, right? And I think that's what you're very much speaking to that right now, that it's the imposition, perhaps through the information operations that you mentioned. It's perhaps through fear, the fear of the unknown, fear of the other. That's then what drives the creation of these groups, right? You were marked as Muslim, right? You were all of a sudden an other, right? Same as I was classified as, an other as well, falling into various different groups, because it was, and just by definition, for an other to exist, there needs to be an us, right? And whatever that us is, that's what drives it. It's a fascinating topic.
And look, I would just like to flag to our listeners as well that my name is Dejan.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Dejan is a uniquely Serbian name. My father gave it to me because he liked the name, and he didn't care about the ethnicities and these little things.
Yeah.
So the fact that my father and my mother were not part of some Muslim conspiracy can be found in the name of their firstborn.
Yeah. Yeah, which is absolutely. You're right. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, most of our listeners who are of our background will know that Dejan is explicitly a Serbian name. My name Vedran, is Croatian. Is a Croatian name, but absolutely nothing to do. Yeah. It's incredible. Now, some of those responsible for Omarska and the other camps, and you mentioned Karaterm and Trnopolje, some of them have been found guilty in the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. How do you feel about those convictions?
Look, firstly, I'm happy that we created conditions for us to prosecute these people at an international level. So I'm happy that the International Court of Justice exists.
Yeah.
Because the alternative was that nothing gets done about it. How do I feel about convictions? Look, I'm glad that they were made accountable, at least. I understand, and especially now having moved out of that and become a more of an adult, I suppose, and understand the difficulties in doing more than was done, definitely. But I go back to this, and a lot of people throughout the ages face this issue, right? You go and 5 or 6 people get put on trial, and they were the leadership that oversaw this. Now the fact is, none of them killed my dad.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of criminals that committed the actual murder got to walk free, and in some sense that hurts. That does hurt. In the others, on the flip side of that, I'm happy that ICTY existed, because at an international level we repudiate that idea of ethnic cleansing as a means of creating mono-ethnic countries.
Yeah.
So as a world, I'm proud of us. We went there and said, hey, this is not what we do. On the other hand, and I said at the beginning that I have lost. When we went to bury Dad, it was 304 people, and there was this old lady who was sitting on the ground, and she was crying, and a lot of women were comforting her. And I turned to my auntie and I said, who is that woman? And she said, today she buries her husband, and it was like 3 or 4 sons. I can't remember. Everybody. And, so, every time you get angry, you go, well, at least you were lucky, because I was lucky, right? When you think about it. I know for listeners it may be hard to understand, but yes, I was lucky, because there's people who went through, indescribable horrors.
Yeah.
There was, not to mention the female family members and the female family friends who were used as sex slaves in different types of camps, who underwent horrors untold and then were released, and they still struggle to put their lives together. So in a lot of senses, I was lucky. And that's why ICTY matters, is because we at least got to talk about what happened and agree as an international level that it is wrong. Yeah.
What does the word forgiveness mean to you? Does it resonate?
It does on some level. I suppose we all experience forgiveness different. I experience forgiveness maybe more as an acceptance.
Yeah.
I accepted what happened to me. I accept.
Yeah.
I accept it. Do I forgive? I don't hold a grudge against all Serbs. First up, I don't. The godfather to my son is a Serbian who went through similar experience because he found himself being a Christian on the Muslim side, right?
Yeah.
So I have friends who are of different ethnic backgrounds, and I do not hold a grudge. But do I forgive the individuals who were responsible for doing what, organizing concentration camp runners? No, I don't forgive them. I don't forgive them. I don't. I will never forgive them. I'm not. It's not something they can live with it as far as I'm concerned, and they if they have to live with that regret, maybe that is the least. Maybe that's going to be the only justice they get on this earth.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, and I think that's completely understandable, which is why I asked the question whether that is something that's even possible. Particularly, you say that some of them are still walking freely. Probably around Prijedor. Have you been back since?
The first time I went, it was 90. So when I left in 93, I went in 96 with my wife. My wife is Australian born, and she's a Queenslander of different I think Anglo background. But she came along to help me out, and I went there, stayed there for 10 days, and I didn't want to stay a minute longer. And then second time I went after I did a tour in Afghanistan. I went to visit because at that stage my grandparents were still alive there. I went to visit them, and again, I would go to Kozarac, but I can't. But then to understand, it's like when and this is with people. When you leave something in such bad terms, you don't want to go back. So I don't necessarily, I'm a bit mistrustful. It brings up some issues, and to be quite honest, I don't like necessarily subjecting myself to it unless I have to.
Yeah, of course.
But,
So you went, the first time you went back was in 96.
Sorry, it was 2006.
2006. Okay, sorry. So that was when you buried your dad.
13 years after I left. Yes.
Yeah. So just backtrack a little bit, so I get the story in my head, right? So you, when you left Prijedor, you went on the Red Cross bus, right? And you said your mum put you on the bus, and then it was later on in Croatia that your grandmother found you, right?
Yes.
Describe that a little bit. What do you mean? Your mother left you, and then she went in another direction, or what happened there?
So the way it panned out was so my uncle, who was in Ternopolje, then released. His family, or was it I can't, I think it was his auntie's family. I think it was his auntie's family. Sent her travel papers, right? From US for them to go across to US, and had him, my auntie, and two of their sons on there, right? And my mom asked for me to come along with them just to Croatia, and it was a Red Cross bus, but you still had to pay money to the drive out. That's how you got out. So mom gave whatever money she had, and it was
that's to get on the list, right, of the bus.
That's right, just to get on the list on the bus, and then a few buses got cancelled, and we finished up traveling from Prijedor to Croatia, to Croatian territory, ultimately finishing up in Zagreb. And in Zagreb, we met some other family members who let us stay at this particular place, and then my uncle, had to move on with his family. And at the same time, I didn't know how my grandmother had connections, but she found out from Varaždin that I was in Zagreb. That's still a mystery. And I asked my grandma, how did you find it? She goes, I was talking to a woman and she said you were there. I was like, okay. Like,
yeah. Let's
sure.
sounds fair.
And that's another thing, right? With a lot of information we found out was through these refugee networks of people tracking each other and passing stories. And that's how she found out. And she came to Zagreb and she said, hey, they're off to USA, come with me. And I had no one. And not only that, she was my grandmother at the same time. It's like, yes. And we went together and we spent next, 4.5, 5 years living together. And then we went from Zagreb and she basically checked me into a refugee camp in Varaždin, which was run out of an old army barracks in Varaždin. And we stayed there for about 4 months.
This is you and your grandmother now. You stayed there together now.
Just grandma. Just grandma. And it's also worth mentioning that it is during that time that I first time interacted with militaries, with Western militaries. The first one, first one was the soldiers and the UN checkpoints we saw as we were driving out of Prijedor. I remember people on the bus, everybody started crying, because we were happy we survived. We had a rough bus ride, and people got beaten up and everything taken off them. As you're making it out of on these refugee camp, these Red Cross guys, you're making it out of the city. Every checkpoint is stopping you. They're just looking for gold. They're taking every last little bit of those unfortunate human beings trying to escape.
Every last bit of dignity as well with it, right?
Everything. Not leaving in nothing. In Varaždin refugee camp was run by some British engineers, and I have immensely happy memories working with those individuals. So firstly, I rocked up to Varaždin and I spoke some broken English. I'm not saying it got much better since then, but I spoke some now. And the soldiers just didn't have no interpreters. So I remember this mustached British engineer one day going, is everybody speaking English? And I said, oh, hello, sir, I speak some English. He's like, great, you are our unofficial interpreter. So, they did a lot of work for the kids. Like, they built us, they built, they went as far as they built us a little disco. And because I was interpreting for them, I had first dibs on humanitarian aid that was arriving. Extra food, like everybody. I was really famous in the refugee camp. Like all these kids can be something, you look at him, he's talking to the Englishman,
He's going places. Yeah.
And I still have some pictures of them, and they and they gave me the little Union Jack they wear on their shirts, and I saw good soldiering. That's what I saw. And it's obviously it shaped me towards serving in the Australian Army. Ultimately, I saw kindness. So, but yes, I detract. Yes, we finished up in Varaždin, and then from Varaždin we went through a series. It was like 5, 6 actually refugee camps in Austria. Yeah.
How was that going? Well, firstly, incredible. But how did you even get into Austria? Because I just think back to our experience. We kind of had we stayed in Croatia for a little while, and then we ended up in Germany. But and I'm not sure if I should probably make this public on a podcast. But it was my mum's uncle who had worked in Germany. He caught a bus down to Croatia where we were staying. Threw us in a bus. We occupied the last seats in the back. As we came we went through Croatia, Slovenia border, no problem. Slovenia, Austria, no problem. Austria, Germany, we got stopped. Everybody's passports were checked. My uncle just left outside with a bit of cash. Walked out of the bus to resolve the question of our passports, mum, brother, and I. And about 15 minutes later, came back without any issues, just a few 100 marks poorer. And we were across the border into Germany, where we then sought asylum. Which is thinking of it now, that's slightly crazy, right? But you make do with what you've got at the time. There's just no survival is the only option, and trying to make do with the circumstances, with the cards you've been dealt. How did that pan out for you? How did you get into Austria?
So firstly, I managed to get out thanks to abilities of my grandmother. Now, my grandmother is an extraordinary human being that, extraordinarily strong woman, was also an orphan herself when she was little. And she had ways of dealing with issues. And the way we dealt with it was, firstly, we knew that the borders were closed. So grandma said, we'll fly. And that's what we did. Because grandma said, nobody in Austria wants refugees, so we're gonna put on our best clothes, get on the airplane from Croatia, and say we're going holidays in Austria. So,
wow. What passports did you have at the time?
We had Bosnian passports.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
We went to Austria. They were like, "All right, guys,
you're not tourists. Yeah.
You're not tourist guys."
Yeah.
and then so I said, "Look, you are stateless. You're not because there were so many. Like the Austrians did extraordinary job for the Yugoslav refugees.
Yeah.
The country, the small country, has taken on hundreds of thousands of people. And the system was made a breaking point. They were like, look, this cannot, you have to continue on and whatnot. Yeah. But we had my auntie and my uncle, so my father's brother and sister living in one of the refugee camps there already. They took us into that refugee camp, and the NGO who was running that refugee camp said they were happy for us that we couldn't register us as refugees, so our family shared their meal rations with us. And we just slept in their rooms until there was a situation where we could actually register as refugee camps, and then we were advised to go to Prijedor, which is also, from what I gather, it's still a refugee migrant camp just outside of Vienna. We went to Prijedor, and there we went to registration, and once we got registered, we got a portion. And Prijedor at that stage worked as it's a big refugee camp, but basically everybody gets there, and then the NGOs, my understanding is then NGOs work with other refugee camps around the country, and when there's a spot open, you basically get sent there.
It's like a funnel, basically,
It's like a funnel, right? Yeah, it's like a funnel. So we were in Prijedor, and it was destiny that I was going to be there, because whilst at Prijedor was walking through that refugee camp, I saw an ad that talked about Australia and Australia refugee intake at that stage. And my other family, so my aunt and my uncle, already were on they put their hands up for Australia as well. They said, look, let's go to Australia. And went to grandma, and grandma was really scared. And my grandfather was still in Bosnia, and she was like, I've really, it's so far away. And I begged her. I said, please just take me there, and you can come back. So yeah, we put our hands up, and then did a whole series of tests as you do. It was legal. It's hard. I think we still have refugee intake programs, but you go through medical, dental, all that sort of stuff. And security tests. But a year passed, and we were still sort of going from refugee camp to refugee camp in Austria, till one day somehow we just found out, hey, you've been successful, so get ready and you'll go. And that was after some just about 2 years in being refugee in Austria. We finally got our ticket to Australia. And I have it framed. I have the visa framed. I think I had a mullet. It was scary.
There you go. No, but I think that's the fact that you have it framed doesn't surprise me, because it's a special moment. I mean, we arrived on the 25th of October, 95, and it's even now, more than 25 years later, we still, as a family, collectively send each other a message, every 25th of October, purely because that's the day our lives changed as a family. It's the day that a new life started. While you were, sorry, yeah.
So, by the way, 25th of November, 95.
Oh, you're kidding? Wow. So I'm literally a month.
Cover the dates. I don't know why. Must have been some coordinated. Sounds like it was like just convenient, because like they can arrive every 25th of the month.
Yeah. Let's pick a random number. Yeah. You get all the Bosnians in on the 25th. Instead of pension date, it's a Bosnian day.
Arrival day. Yeah, that's it.
What was life like for so you're at this stage, you were from 12 to 13, 14 into 15, around all these different refugee camps. What was life like? To describe that for us.
Yeah, and it was a strange time. I was 13. You just became a teenager. It's a time where a lot of teenagers seek, belonging and whatnot, but belonging couldn't be there. You're changing friends every 4 or 5 months, because you move on. There was no ways to, meet a girlfriend or something like that. Everything was passing. At the same time, I had issues in certain schools, in certain places with racism and bullying, and being chased again, and as you find in all countries, there's always certain fringes, and including kids who are very harsh for being different. So, in some sense, it was easier than Bosnia. In some sense, it was more difficult because you just couldn't spread your roots somewhere, right? And then go like, hey, I'm going to stay here for a while.
Did you go to school? In
yes,
Bosnia?
Yes, I did. So I finished up, in Prijedor. I went for a few months. Then I finished up living in this little place called Valm, which is sort of in the middle. It's the most idyllic place you can imagine. It's right in the middle of Steiermark. It's sort of sound, the sound of music type place. It's just gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And we live inside a small camp, which used to be a Catholic convent, and then the nuns donated it to the refugees. There was, from memory, there was about 20 families in there. Really small township as well. So I went to school there for about 7-8 months. Had to change school after about 3 months because I had some really bad bullying occurred at that stage. I found myself as being, the only refugee there, and the kids were unkind, to say the least. So I finished up going to a different school again.
What happened? What happened? What happened?
It was mainly it was mainly for being a foreigner. Kids would chant, foreigners get out, and they would chase me and try to beat me up and beat them up, and and the usual issues you find when the plague of bullying captures schools. So I was fortunate that that I was sort of age 14 was difficult, but age 15 I started growing rapidly, and as you know me, I'm not exactly a small guy. And I became a relatively large 15-year-old, and that sort of drove off some bullies. So I changed schools, and then finished up for the final year. Final year was I believe it was year 9 with in Graz. I finished year 9, and then sort of continued my schooling. But needless to say, that schooling was disrupted for about 2.5 years, severely disrupted.
And it was in German, right?
Yes, it was in German. Yes, so I came here speaking German. It was in German. It was
How was that? How was that? I mean, I think back to my experience, and I ended up in Germany, in Munich, right? So again, we weren't too far off. We were just on the other side of the Alps. But I remember that experience being as well, on one hand, somewhat exciting, because you're like, okay, I'm in a different place, but also exceptionally frightening. And I remember my first day in a German school. Obviously, I didn't speak German at that time, but they came in and I had to do a physical health check. I had no idea what they were doing. All of a sudden, I was in a room, and they were asking me to take my clothes off, and then they had the stethoscope and checking. So I realized, okay, it's a medical or whatever. But then they asked me to take my underpants off as well, which was really, I think back to that moment of like, this is kind of where the fear kind of kicks in, and I started striking out at them and kind of kicking the people away. There was a lady and a guy, and they were both kind of, no, it's okay, calming me down. And all they wanted to do was check that I was, like that everything was okay, kind of thing. But to me, that was, even now I think back, it was an exceptionally frightening. Everything else was okay, but that was kind of the final straw of my modesty, of my privacy. As a, at that stage I was 12, I think, or 11. It was exceptionally intimidating time. But perhaps also because we harbor this idea of Germany and Germans, who like you said about Austria, I think, the German people and the German government have a very special place in my heart for letting us stay when it was hardest. But it certainly wasn't easy being there.
No, it wasn't easy. Like I finished 1 year of schooling under occupied Prijedor, and again, we afraid this podcast is going to go forever if we start dealing. But it was not pleasant. It was not pleasant for the Muslim kids that were left behind. We were bullied, to say the least. We were made feel really unwelcome. So when I came to Austria, I harbored fears of going to school because I didn't want to be that kid again that finds himself being the oddity, and that's exactly what happened to me. So I found myself on a path where I was like rapidly just didn't want to be in school anymore. I just couldn't hack it. But things obviously changed. In the last place, like in Graz, it was getting a bit better, and then definitely when I got in Australia, it was really in Australia that the efforts of our teachers and our social workers, that they really reintegrated me back into the education system. It was most certainly difficult, and it was scary. It was very scary for a child, and that is something worthwhile noting. That having been a soldier now for rather long time, reasonably long time, and having experienced war, I find that war is easier on soldiers than civilians. Because it's the destructiveness that war brings to social systems, to lives, is just it's enormous, and in many ways shapes people's lives for generations to come. So I definitely think it is harder on the civilian population when the war is being fought in amongst them.
And that's ultimately what this podcast is really about. It is about the costs of war, right? Through those that have lived it, because oftentimes we don't understand this, and it's easy to cast judgment on those who you perceive as different or remote. And I think we found this, during the 2015 refugee crisis. Oftentimes we misunderstand or misinterpret what the reality of a refugee is like. I just think back to the language surrounding being a refugee in Germany, right? And again, I love Germany and I love German people, I really do. But we were there as refugees on this permit called Duldung, which roughly translates to bearing or tolerating you. I think the formal translation is the tolerated stay permit. Just the language of that in itself is so. It's about that belonging, right? Like you were talking about before, how important that is. Within the term itself, you are told you don't belong. We are just tolerating you because we can't deport you right now for one reason or another. And I think that's an important insight, I think, to unpack from our discussion. I think both of us having been refugees, I think that's something that stands out for me. But just listening to your story as well, this idea of belonging, of the otherness, keeps coming through. Mm-hmm. Now that you're in Australia, you've been here for nearly more than 25 years, nearly 20 of which have been in the Australian Army. How do you identify? How do you identify now? What is your identity? Are you Bosnian, Australian? Are you something else? Or what are you?
Well, I identify as Australian. I have for a very long time. This is one thing that when I came to Australia, it was the first time that I took a free breath, and it was the first time that people didn't. And I went to a school. The first school I went into, we went to a part of school called Intensive English Center, and it was very much, it was all like, all different refugees and whatnot, and all around the world. None of us could speak English, and we were hanging out, just smiling at each other. It was
Where
great.
Where did you land? Where did you first arrive in Australia?
Sydney.
Sydney. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, so yeah, same here. Which IEC did you go to?
I went to Holroyd High School.
Okay. Right.
Holroyd, which is out near Grayston's, just outside of Maryland.
Right. Okay.
I lived outside. Most of my time prior to joining the army was spent around Maryland.
Yeah.
Which is of course, a very multicultural area.
Yeah.
But okay, it was. I felt a sense of belonging in Australia, and that is the way that Grandma and I were accepted into this country, the opportunities I was afforded. It would be amiss to say that I feel anything but Australian.
Yeah.
I acknowledge my Bosnian heritage. I most definitely do, and I still speak the language or listen to the music and everything else. But I don't think when I say sense of belonging, my sense of national belonging lies with Australia. My sense of cultural belonging is obviously shaped by who I am.
Yeah.
But I identify myself as Australian, and it actually gives me a sense of freedom as well, because as Australian, you can just choose to tune out to hate that I can hear in where we came from, rising gang.
Even now,
as Australian.
Yeah, no, that's great, and again, that resonates really strongly with me. You've mentioned that your experiences in the concentration camps with the British soldiers. You saw good soldiering and you saw kindness. So, thinking back now to your entire experience of Bosnia, the war, refugee days, all the tragic loss you've experienced, how has that shaped your own service in the Australian Army?
I'll just quickly correct you. It's the experience of the British in the refugee camps.
Oh, sorry. What did I say?
Concentration camps.
Oh, sorry. No. Of course. Sorry. Thank you. Refugee camp. Yeah.
And how good soldiering, and how does it shape me as a soldier? Look, there was. I was actually thinking, in preparation for this interview, there's two stories I want to contrast here that I think they held vividly in my memory, and I think they shaped what sort of soldier I am. And the first one starts in Bosnia, and it was one of the most scariest experience I had there. It was a raid on our apartment by some Serbian forces, by some bearded men. They had big beards, as they did in the black hats.
Yeah.
They came in and they smashed the door in, and my dad was away already, like he was taken away. My uncle was living in our apartment. They were looking for somebody. They just busted the door down, stormed the apartment. We lived in a really small apartment, like it was maybe like 50, 60 square meters at tops. And they went. There was the living room and there was a spare bedroom. And the living room was my uncle and my aunties, so the adults, and in the spare bedroom were all the kids. And while they were in the living room, they started asking my uncle for questions. Who was he? What was he? Was he a sympathizer of Alia, whatever.
Yeah.
And my uncle replied to him, "I'm not a militia brother." As you know how in Bosnia you can finish with brother. Yeah. And this guy just lost it. He was like, "I'm not your brother," and he started screaming at him and abusing him. And my mom and my auntie started begging for mercy. And all of us were just crying. We were all traumatized. And right at that moment, from memory, it was about 5 soldiers who entered in there. There was a young guy. He was also bearded. And he, as they stormed in, we had this coat hanger. We had we hang coats just as we entered the house. Yeah. And they kicked some coats, and he turned around and started putting coats back up. And he left his rifle outside and closed the door and sat down with us kids and started interacting with us and joking and telling us it's all going to be okay, and provided an absolute contrast to the horror that was happening. And he stayed in my memory. He stayed in my memory because it shows a human being coming out behind the uniform, going, "Hey, these kids are scared." And he showed me what I consider kindness and consideration. So to that end, he influenced me in the way when I go about my business. I'm more careful of the mess that I'm creating around myself. Like I'm acutely aware of the impacts of what I do. The second part were the British soldiers in the refugee camp and the efforts they did to help us out. And when I say good soldiering, is because they went above and beyond. They really tried to help us all. They were there day in, day out, fixing stuff, painting walls, just contributing, enhancing, building something for us, right? So we can ease some of because the camp wasn't in a great state, far from it. And it was their interaction. It was them coming out and during their breaks playing soccer with us. It was them organizing us a disco. It was them. I knew that those soldiers you can see that they were doing more than they had to do. And I think it is good soldiering because the effect that it creates is ultimately like right? Who was so influenced by that firstly, I still remember, I still treasure the pictures I have of them, the Union Jack that they gave me. Built through those soldiers, I built a relationship with British people, so very important. So that's why I say good soldiering. And I would say, although that, and I don't want my, our listeners to misunderstand me, but that soldier in Bosnia who fixed up stuff, and that is an attribute. That is an attribute of the soldier. Right? He's trying to mend things. And it's I think that's how it shaped me as an officer. Is I'm aware of the mess that is made by war. I'm not saying that I'm a realist. I understand the wars will always occur, but I'm acutely aware that the second order and the third order effects we're creating people around us, and that it is not simple for them, and we shouldn't fall into the trap of simplifying the experiences of the civilian population around us. Yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely powerful. I think it's an important insight, particularly for those who are, like both of us, right, who are wielding military power in time of war or peacekeeping and so on. Have you? Now you've deployed a number of times to Afghanistan. You've also been to East Timor. Were there times there where you remembered your experience of war and that kind of, either changed the decision that you've made or changed how you approached a particular situation?
Yes, there were. I'm always acutely aware of it. East Timor was the first time, it was some 6 years after I arrived to Australia, I found myself brave as a soldier, and it was again, it was a similar theme of the misery sown amongst the civilian population of seeing those kids. So it did assist me. I readily connect to people. For some people, it takes longer to understand the human side that they're seeing outside of the vehicle as they're driving. For me, I felt immediate connection. I felt deep sense of empathy, and I always do. For Afghanistan, there is, what I found is there's some cultural traits that we inherently share with Afghan people. Coming from Bosnia, and a lot of those cultural traits were brought on by the Turkish Empire and whatnot, and so hence some of our sayings, some of our foods, some of the similarities in our family. And again, I felt empathy. I think I understood them a bit better, and also it helps us because you can build a construct of the opposition's framework as well. Right? You can. I'm not saying I understand what the opposing side is trying to achieve, but I can build a construct in my head on how they came to their conclusions and what they're going for. Because again, I've seen people buy into some very unreasonable ideas and be part of this collective. And so it does. And every time I go overseas and I'm among civilian population. I remember something else from when I was a refugee or when I was during the war, and in some sense, it's almost I'm not, in some sense, helps me come to terms with things as well, because there's nothing worse than the sense that it is you who experience the absolute horror and nobody else has. And as bad as this sounds, I'm not promoting people experience horror. I'm just saying that when you see that this condition is actually shared and you weren't that special, it sort of helps you go like, okay, well, don't pity yourself. Just crack on with it, mate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. What motivates you now, or maybe a better way to put it is, what has helped you throughout your life deal with, like you just said, to contextualize your experience? What tools or methods do you use to keep yourself going?
I like reading history, right? And I think at the beginning of this podcast, we talked about how I found out about the horrors that occurred. Is that we heard all the stories later on, and same sense, I tried to research what happened in that old Yugoslavia. I tried to research the history of people. I tried to contextualize it so we can get away from this, from this lazy duality that we apply to everything, good and evil, black and white. Everything is like so simplified. Everything is gray. Yeah. So what I do is I go and I research, and through research, about reading about it, about building a better picture along the way, it helps me sort of contemplate and bring it along. Yeah. The other and the most important thing are people in my life that help me. My wife, my family. You. The great military family, you know what I mean, are always there at hand, and so it's there is no simple solution to dealing with this. I suppose what you have to guard against is building a really deep mistrust against everyone. You have to understand that your perceptions of something occurring may not necessarily be shared perceptions by everybody else. And if you truly want to understand what happened to you, you have to apply some academic rigor along the way to understand the human condition and why God did it. So I know it's not a clear answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's a fantastic answer. And what springs to mind, I mean, you keep kind of reiterating the idea of the narratives that people embrace, and that you have to unpack your own narratives. And, having seen people who have committed horrendous acts, through misinformation, I'm just reminded of, I think is Voltaire, those who make you believe absurdities will make you commit atrocities. I think that's a very, fitting, and just the fact that you're linking education to that very point, I think it's hugely important. And you've been very generous with your time, but maybe just one last question that kind of builds on this, right? You've since joining the army, you've completed a master's in military and defense studies. You've done a Master of Business. You've got a graduate certificate in Justice. Is this part of the reason, that you're a perpetual student? Is it to keep nurturing, to understand, to unfold, or what drives this thirst for knowledge?
Well, firstly, I have to acknowledge my mother, who yelled at me even before the war started that if I don't study, I'm nothing, right?
That rings a bell, yeah.
The groundwork. You know what Bosnians like. If you don't study,
you'll become nothing. Yeah, if you don't study, you'll end up in politics. That was the.
But yes, I do. It's a form of therapy. But along the way, and that is the great thing about knowledge. Along the way, it's not specifically the subject that you're studying. It's not specifically, a certain field that you're studying. It's what you're exposed to as you're researching in that field. You come across some amazing points, right? Amazing observations about the human condition, about how the world functions, or somebody's view on how the world functions. So so to that end, I use study as a form of meditation. I use study as to keep my mind sharp. And as much as I love studying. I'm not a huge fan of writing essays. I'll bring that straight up. Like I don't go out of my way to write them randomly.
Yeah.
You know, I suffer them same as humanity does. But I have a, when I commit to something, I stick to it. Right? It's like a bull with a red. You know, I go for it. So yeah, look, it's I think at times that world would be a better place if people read and studied a little bit more. Along the way, along that journey, you learn of more things, and you get rid of these simplifications, you stereotypes and prejudices that form the groundwork for greater evils.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so to that end, you know, I strongly advocate for people to study.
And one final question, if I can. You are now father to Senad, who it's your dad's name, right? That your son carries. What do you hope for him? What are your hopes for him?
You know, many people think that having a dad who lived through all this, I would be some sort of, you know, realist. You know, well, this is what it was. I'll declare to listeners, I'm a helicopter parent, right? Like I shield them. I won't lie to you. Look, I you know, it all sounds well and good. I see in him, you know, and this is the great thing about fatherhood is you have a chance to shape somebody's life and create a life that you wished for yourself, right? A life, you know, surrounded by love. Life of not wanting, of not being hungry, you know. So what I hope for him, Vedana, is that one day, you know, when he's a grown man, is that firstly that along the way, Katie and I would have imparted some good ethical and moral goalposts for that kid. So he's a good human being. That he can turn around and say, hey, dad arrived in this country as a refugee. He served, and he committed himself to Australia, so he feels anchored to this country. He feels anchored to this country. And you know, lastly, I just want him to have childhood. I just want him to have an uninterrupted childhood. I want him to, you know, have friends that he met, as he does already. He met in daycare, that he's still friends when he's in year 12. You know, I want him to be happy, and then he can make a choice if he wants to travel and whatnot. So in a lot of senses, I'm going to make a very boring life for him, and then he can make it more exciting. And I, you know, I do it because it helps me as well. Yeah.
Boz, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm deeply touched by your story, and thank you for so candidly sharing your experiences. I think you're an exceptional human being. You've gone through so much, and you've turned all of that, some might say, negative energy into something so positive, where not only are you serving, but you are a leader, and a respected leader at that, somebody who looks to expand his understanding of the world on a day-to-day basis. And I thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I think this is an important conversation, and you were one of the first people I thought of when I thought of doing this podcast, because I think your story needs to be told, because it is so uniquely relevant to the message of this particular podcast, and that is that there are so many unseen wounds in war that we rarely speak about, that are rarely covered in any great depth in our media or social media, and that that are that are not seen. You know, there are scars that are carried internally. So I thank you for your time. I really do. It's very, very, very much appreciated.
And look, I thank you also for giving me the opportunity, you know, to talk. And I mean that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for starting this. You know, I hope all our listeners at least draw something out of these conversations. And you know, and again, if during my conversation, you know, that these are my views, and if I offended somebody, I do apologize. The story is as it is. Yeah. And thank you very much for having me. I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Voices of War. You can access all episodes on www.thevoicesofwar.com or by subscribing wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, as we'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can reach me on info@thevoicesofwar.com.